Hey everyone, welcome back to Tactical Magic. This is Molly Mandelberg, your host, and I have a very special and brilliant guest with me today, Kathleen Oweegon. So one of the things that can make or break our growth as people, and especially our ability to stick with it when the going gets tough in our business, is our desire and our capacity to return to communication, to connection, to find ways to navigate through perhaps an upset or a heartbreak or a disconnect with another person and clean that up so that we can actually find connection again. And who we are anywhere is really who we are everywhere. So I'm really excited for this episode today, where we will be discussing conflict resolution, deep conscious communication, and ways to navigate those waters from a place of empowerment. So hang tight. We'll be right back.
It's not just about mastering technology. It's not just about brand or messaging. It's not just about making more money. It's about showing up in a big way so your people can find you. This is about bringing your most wild and authentic self into the hustle and grind. Welcome to Tactical Magic, a business strategies podcast for the warrior goddess entrepreneur.
All right. Kathleen Oweegon is the founder of Bridges of Peace, providing facilitation, training, communication coaching, and mediation services. The focus of Kathleen's work is to help communities, organizations, and individuals become empowered to fulfill their greatest potential through dialogue, negotiation, and collaboration. This often involves bringing seemingly discordant voices together in collaborations that result in mutual understanding, increased wisdom, and growth. Welcome to the show, Kathleen.
Thank you, Molly. I am delighted to be with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. So tell us a little bit about how you found your way into doing the work that you're doing now.
Well, that's an interesting question. I've had a variety of professions in my lifetime, and among them were various kinds of traditional healing arts. And yet my spiritual guidance was that I could not demand compensation for that work, that I could receive it, but I couldn't demand it. And so that led to a rather impoverished state of being. And so, as I often do when I'm feeling cornered, I prayed for higher wisdom than my own, for what could I do that was on my path, that was a healing tool that I could provide to others, but also earn an income. And the guidance came to me that mediation would be that path. And mediation is a very powerful healing tool. Conflict resolution in any form is a very powerful healing tool, because as my healing teachers had taught me, that when we are in a state of dis-ease, unwellness, we have imbalance of mind, body, and soul. And so healing is restoring that balance of mind, body, and soul. And lo and behold, when people are in conflict, they also are out of balance, mind, body, and soul. So when I can help people restore peace and harmony in their world, then that helps them find peace and harmony and well-being, mind, body, and soul within themselves.
Beautiful. I love that. I love that take on what being in a healed state is too, is that balance between those things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So has there been, I'm sure all of us have experienced conflict in our own lives. Was there something in your life that sort of empowered you to know that this was your capacity, or a conflict that you found resolved in that, a personal story perhaps?
Well, there's probably lots of personal stories. And I have to say, interestingly enough, that I was a very, very angry young person. I was a raging teenager and had no way to manage my emotions, work with my emotions, communicate my emotions. And so I raged. And I found that didn't get me very far, and it also hurt people that I loved. And knowing, since I was a very small child, that I am here to help people heal their world in whatever way, internal or out or external, I recognized that I had to find a way to work with my own emotion, my own anger in a way that was more constructive. So I studied meditation. I studied a variety of healing arts, a lot of spiritual paths. And along the way, I found that inner peace. And so through that, I minimized the amount of times that I have conflict, or at least I should say conflict that I wasn't able to resolve well. Mm-hmm. And so there could be many stories. I could take up all of our time together telling those stories. I think the most important message is that finding that inner peace and then finding the tools to help create peace with others is what led me to a place where those few times when I do have conflict now, and they're very rare, I'm able to work through it in a positive way and have an outcome that's better than we started with before the conflict ever happened. So it's the tools that are so important.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And I can think of so many examples in my own life where, especially being someone who's nomadic and who leaves places all the time, it's like, okay, this got uncomfortable or this got, messy. It's easy to just walk away. It's easy to just leave. It's easy to start over somewhere new or start a new relationship instead of cleaning up the one that you're in, or, quit your job and begin as somewhere else instead of fixing whatever that disconnect was at your workplace. And the key that I want to pull out from what you just said is having the tools to be able to clean up that situation, whether you stay or go, whether you want to keep that partner or that job or that, client or not. Being able to clean that up brings it to a better place than it ever started because you were willing to walk through that fire. And it is so uncomfortable. It is so easy to resist the discomfort of that conversation. But when you have the tools and the resources to navigate those choppy kind of waters, that you feel empowered to have those conversations. And my God, that is such a liberating place to be coming from, because you're in the power of like, no matter what happens, I'm willing to stand here and be with me in a way that's peaceful and that's looking for the, like, not higher ground, but the healed place in all of this, which is awesome.
So true, Molly. It is. And I think one of the reasons that people look for other ways to end conflict without resolving conflict, which is what you were talking about when we just choose to escape, or we choose to take it to court and have a judge decide or have an arbitrator decide, that might bring an apparent end to the conflict. It does not bring resolution. It does not bring true peace. And it takes courage to step into the face of conflict. One of my favorite quotes by Winston Churchill is, "Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen." And both of those are necessary to resolve conflict. Having the courage to speak our heart and to truly deeply listen to the other person and hear their heart.
I love that. So would you give us maybe some beginning tools of how to start broaching those conversations or holding ourselves in those conversations or conducting those conversations so that we can have more of that empowerment when we want to clean things up?
I would absolutely love to. It's one of my favorite conversations to have. And so I would say, first and foremost, it's important to find one's place of being centered first. And even if it's a conflict that just, boom, arose in your face, somebody just gets in your face with upset, and all of a sudden you're taken aback, even in that moment, you can mentally and spiritually step back for a second, take a deep breath, and come into your place of center. Another quote that I love is, and I don't remember who to attribute it to, is that the right conversation in the wrong frame of mind is the wrong conversation. And so it's so important to get into that frame of mind, that place of feeling centered. And then if we have the time, and this is the ideal, and sometimes it's necessary to even say, I need a few minutes before we have this conversation, so that you can get into that centered place and identify, first and foremost, what is my goal for the outcome of this conversation? And that goal is not about what we want the other person to do or stop doing. It's bigger. What kind of dynamic do I want to create? What kind of energy exchange do I want to have with this person at the outset of this conversation? What's my goal, my highest goal for the outcome of the conversation? So once we determine that, then it's important to identify what it is we need for them to hear and how to deliver that in a way that the other person will feel safe hearing. So often when we have high emotion, we want to use our voice to express that high emotion, right? When we're angry, we yell, right? Or when we're afraid, we whimper. We use our voice to express our emotion. I encourage people to use your voice to express your inner peace and your highest wisdom. And one thing I should say too, in terms of that highest wisdom, is that I often do a real quick prayer before I enter a difficult conversation. I'll just simply ask to be guided to see, think, speak, and act from my highest and wisest self. And so I'll do that to help me get centered. And then when I'm thinking about what do I want to say, what do I want to communicate to them energetically as well as verbally, and use that in my tone of voice, that peaceful, centered, highest wisdom kind of tone of voice. And that also can help calm the other person down, because if we use an agitated or angry tone of voice, the other person's going to put up their shields, right? They're going to arm their psychological phasers, as it were, and be ready for defense or attack. I want that person to feel safe hearing what I need them to hear. It's the best way for us to get heard, is to help the other person feel safe hearing us. So I think about how I want to say what I need them to hear and how I'll help them feel safe hearing that. And then I also want to make sure that I'm asking them open-ended questions to get to what's happening for them in this dynamic. And open-ended questions, of course, are those ones that require more than a yes or no. They're those questions that start with what, where, when, how, and possibly why, although it's important to watch the tone of voice when we use the word why, because we don't want the person to feel as though we're asking them to justify or defend themselves. Mm. So we want to use an inquiring and invitational tone of voice when we're delivering those kinds of questions. And then once we ask the question, or even if we haven't asked a question and they're just telling us what's on their mind, to be open as we listen to them, to be curious, to want to deeply hear what it is they need us to know. And then once we've heard that, it's so very helpful, and this is a great tool for de-escalating another person, is to reflect back what we heard them say. And it doesn't have to necessarily be the words. It could be the key points. It could be the emotion they expressed. It could be the impact of whatever it was they were telling us about. So it might be something like along the lines of, so if I heard you right, when I did this, you felt really hurt by that. Am I right about that? So I didn't even repeat their words back, but the essence of what I got from them was how what I did impacted them. And when people feel heard in that way, it's amazing. I have seen mediation clients who came into mediation just beet red as the shirt you're wearing. And they're not in conflict with me, they're in conflict with another person, and the other person is unwilling to acknowledge anything that's going on for the other person, because often we feel that if we acknowledge, we are accepting blame or responsibility for their experience, as opposed to just simply acknowledging that they've had the experience. And so even though I'm not a party to the conflict, I, as a person in the room hearing the conversation, reflect back to that person what they've just described emotionally and the impact of what they've heard. I see people's facial color just go back down to normal. I see their eyes begin to soften. I see their body relax, their energy shifts, just because they were acknowledged. So I encourage listeners to don't be afraid to acknowledge the other person's experience. It will be a profound connector. So I ask those open-ended questions. I reflect what I heard. I acknowledge what I heard. And then from that point, we go back and forth. And hopefully at some point, we get to the place where we can negotiate what kind of outcome will work for both of us. And that's something that we are not taught as children, or at least not my generation. how to negotiate around interpersonal dynamics, whether it's a behavioral change, whether it's some other kind of change, environmental or otherwise. It's so important. So it's really about getting centered, being mindful of how we deliver information, listening deeply, and then negotiating a win-win outcome that will work for both of us and bring that peace.
I love that. I love that it's a negotiation too of like, how do we get this need met, or how do we navigate these waters differently moving forward?
I'm so happy you said that, Molly, because negotiation should absolutely be needs-based negotiation, not position-based, but needs. What are the unmet needs that have caused this conflict? Because I have found that emotional upset is almost always about some unmet need. And yes, there may have been some experience that happened, and that's what we believe has caused the upset. But maybe that experience caused us to feel shamed. So then we have a need for self-esteem, or for the esteem of the other person, or some other need, safety and security, love and belonging, all of those needs, self-actualization. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Needs-based negotiation is so very critical.
Yeah. That was one of the most profound things that I learned when I read Nonviolent Communication, the book on that, which I'm blanking on the writer right now. Marshall?
It was Marshall Rosenberg.
Marshall Rosenberg, yeah. Was just that, I mean, that's what emotional literacy is the ability to name whatever emotion is up and whatever need is not being met. And I feel like that's something that we're just not taught. We're not taught, we're taught like sad, happy, whatever, and maybe we're taught, we have a need for human contact or connection or whatever, but there's like a huge list, like a master list of our needs that we don't even have words for most of the time. And so I actually, when I read that book, I printed out a cheat sheet of emotions and needs and like laminated it and put it in my wallet at the time. So I could be like, hey, I'm feeling an emotion. I'm feeling triggered in some way. And instead of being in reaction to that and trying to justify it by someone wronging me or something happened and all the reasons, it's like, okay, what is this emotion I'm feeling right now? And what is the need that emotion is trying to tell me is not being met? And then you're just more equipped to have that conversation because you're aware of what's going on for you. And that awareness is a place that's easier to communicate from than, like you said, the trigger, the activated state where we come in with our face just beat red and we don't know how to be acknowledged in that state because really we're just like caught up in the emotion without being able to communicate it effectively. So there's something so powerful just in knowing the words and finding the words and having the tools to, first off, ground yourself and be willing to show up for a conflict resolution or conversation like that. And then knowing how to, it's disarming to be able to acknowledge someone else in the middle of that, to be able to disarm someone so they're no longer in their triggered state and they start to begin connecting back to that resource place of peace for them. The conversation that can ensue after that is such a different thing than when we stay in our triggers or we stay in that activated state or when we show up to that conversation in an activated state. And I love what you said also about sometimes you need to take a break. Like somebody wants to come at you with this conversation. You might need a couple minutes first before you even are ready to have the conversation, just to chill, just to take a few deep breaths, maybe just to calm down and recognize what that emotion is for you, what's true for you in that moment, what that need even is. Maybe check your cheat sheet so you know what the need that's not being met is. But and this isn't something that we should know. I mean, it's something we should know, but it's not something that we should know because we've been taught it. This is stuff that we have to actually like seek out the knowledge and the awareness and the tools and maybe even have chances to practice them before they're gonna be readily available in a triggery moment, in an activated moment. So
absolutely. What you're talking.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say what you're talking about is developing fluency in how we talk about our emotion. Yes. Go on. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. And it can be really powerful. I've had an experience where someone very close in my life, there was something weird between us and it created like not niceness, I'll say, for many like decades of my life. And I'm not I don't have that many decades to speak to, but this was decades of my life that this relationship had been kind of strained. And we finally had a conversation about it, and it changed everything. It changed our ability to see each other. It changed our ability to be in the same space. It changed like how we communicate now completely, because suddenly we're now not on contradicting teams because we were willing to have that one conversation. So yeah, the benefit of being willing to build this fluency, I think, is astronomical, and there's no way to know what potential it has to change our lives until we start walking that direction. So I'm curious, what are some things that you've seen change for people, or what are some common conflicts that you're often working with people to help them resolve? Like, where are people coming to you, and what are they often noticing when they're on the other side of that conversation or in that fluency?
Interesting question. Before I answer the question, just because I want to make sure that I don't forget to say this, and it ties into what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
One thing that I would really like for the listeners to know and to remember is that in every moment, in every conversation, someone is going to set the tone for that conversation. And even if somebody comes at you with great upset, rather than let them set the tone for this is going to be a conversation of great upset, we can set the tone that this is going to be a collaboration. This is going to be a partnership to work through this. We can talk about high emotion in a safe way, but to talk with high emotion will cause everyone to feel unsafe, and things will continue to escalate and likely not de-escalate until someone shifts the tone. Someone sets a different tone. So I encourage people, even when you're feeling high upset, to be mindful of what tone do I want to set. And I encourage you to have the goal of setting a peaceful and collaborative tone, because really, when we are in conflict with one another, we are partners in the same situation. Therefore, we can be partners in the resolution. It doesn't have to be either or, it can be both and win-win. And so just wanted to touch on that before I forgot that
very
point.
important.
Yeah. And so to answer your question, a lot of the kinds of conflicts that come to the table, as it were, to the mediation table in my world, are usually workplace conflicts, or often neighborhood or family. So I find those are the three that are the most. I don't do that many divorce conflicts in the last several years, primarily because I moved to a state in which I'm not yet familiar with the laws around divorce. When I was in New Mexico, I did a lot of divorce mediation as well. I would say that underlying theme are the biggest underlying theme that I see in the conflicts that I work with are people not feeling heard and recognized, and feeling as though their needs have been ignored. So in family dynamics, these are the people that we've known our whole lives. And in the case of our parents, for example, they changed our diapers. They saw us struggle learning to walk. They saw us spitting up food. They saw all of those aspects of our young childhood. And sometimes it's hard for them to see us for who we are now as adults and independent and capable of making our own decisions. And so often family conflicts are around people not respecting one another for who they are now, and trying to keep them in the frame of who they once were for various reasons. It could be ego, it could be a comfort level, it could be just a lack of awareness that, wow, I'm still treating you like a child and you're 32 years old, right? And so there's very often in family situations that people are so close to one another that they don't really see each other anymore. They see some image from the past and they project that on to one another. And so with those kinds of situations, among the things that I do is for one thing, I ask everyone who I'm talking to, I will ask them each the same general questions in terms of what's up for you. I may not quite say it that way, but I'll start with, so tell us what you would like to talk about. And I ask the parties to start with just giving me the topics that they want to talk about without the detail. And then once I hear that from everybody, I look for common ground right away. All right. So out of this family of 4 or 5, that there's a couple of them who want to talk about respect. And there might be a couple of them who want to talk about a particular incident. And as I am hearing the different things that they tell me they want to talk about, I'm looking for common ground. I also ask them what their overarching goal for the outcome is, and look for the common ground there as well. And so I also encourage people, even if you're not a mediator, even if you're not working with other people's conflicts, but for looking at your own and a conflict that you're in with someone else, look for shared values, look for common ground, because often when we're in conflict, we're looking so much at how we are different and how we see the situation differently. We forget to look at what do we have in common? What do we share? What connects us? What are our bonds? And with families, I often will take a moment, and I do this in workplace too, where I ask each person to just say one thing that they appreciate about the other person or about the other people in the conversation. Because when we recognize what we appreciate about one another, again, it helps create those bonds and starts shifting that energy to the positive. So in family dynamics, it often is a matter of having to do multiple negotiations, right? So it might be dad and one of the daughters, or mom and one of the daughters, or maybe the daughters, or some combination. So very often we're looking at having to negotiate multiple agreements between multiple individuals that aren't necessarily agreements of the entire group. And in workplace conflict, if it's more than 2 people, the same thing may be true. And often those negotiations are around behavioral changes, whether it's being more mindful and courteous of another person, whether it's tones of voice or ways that we behave. Often we find that those negotiations are behavioral, whereas if it's a divorce mediation or a personal injury kind of mediation, those are often more tangible negotiations, where we're negotiating property or finances. And even then, I encourage people to try to move from their head into their heart, because regardless of the conversation, regardless of the context, regardless of the relationship between people, we are all human beings and we all have so many things in common. And the more we recognize that, the easier it is to collaborate and resolve conflicts.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous. Yes. I love that. And just the power of, being a beacon of hope and possibility for these kinds of conversations to occur. Like, I really honor and admire that about you. Thank you for waving that banner and sharing that message, because this is hugely important. I think it's so common, especially in the media and the movies we watch and the books we read, that we don't see examples of these kinds of conversations successfully occurring. So many people don't even know how they go down. So to be someone who's teaching that and who's broadcasting that, especially on your podcast, also Co-Creating Peace, which everyone should go and subscribe to right away.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really powerful to be a beacon of hope for this kind of a conversation to keep occurring in the world. So thank you for sharing that. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you and follow you or check in?
Well, people can go to my website, bridgesofpeace.com, and they can find out about all the different classes that I teach, the communication coaching. There's also a page on my website for my podcast. And by the way, just for everyone's information, my podcast, Co-Creating Peace, is all about conscious communication and conflict transformation. And every single episode has a tool or an understanding for people to walk away with and use in their life. So it's a very practical kind of podcast. And on my website, you can use the contact form to reach me, or you can just use Oweegon at bridgesofpeace.com. That's OWEEGON at bridgesofpeace.com. And just to clarify, there's another website called Bridges for Peace, which is a beautiful organization. They're not me. I am Bridges of Peace.
Awesome. Good clarification. Yes. So we will put the link to that in the show notes for anyone to go and check out. And I can confirm that podcast is amazing and highly recommend listening to it. And yeah, if this was a conversation that piqued your interest at all, go subscribe to that show and give it some time and energy to listen to that and hear more examples and get more tools of how this can happen. Yeah, it can feel really isolating to think there's a conflict you don't know how to resolve in your life. And it is so much easier to just get the tools and get back your emotional bandwidth by having these conversations and getting to a place of resolution with them. So thank you, Kathleen. And you've shared so much wisdom on this episode already. Are there any last words of wisdom that you want to leave people with?
Well, thank you. I would only say that on the other side of conflict is a beautiful place that might be stronger and better than where you were before the conflict. So have the courage, have the strength, have the wisdom to move through the conflict and find that place of peace. And may you always find new ways to co-create peace in your life.
Awesome. Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone out there, for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please give us a subscribe. Maybe share this episode with a friend. Maybe even share it with somebody who you have conflict with and you want to bridge that gap and start that dialogue. And thank you so much, Kathleen, for being on the show today.
Thank you, Molly. It's been a joy and a privilege to be with you. Thank you.